Welcome back to Delta Waterfowl's The Voice of the Duck Hunter podcast. I'm your host, Joel Bryce. In this episode, we're going to explore probably one of the more exciting things, aside from a flock of backpedaling greenheads, that can happen to a duck hunter, asking for permission to hunt a nice patch of private land and getting a yes. Now, mind you, there are regions where this is really tough. Some would even say impossible to just knock on a door like it's the 1950s, shake the farmer's hand, and gain access to hunt. Urban sprawl is on a constant march, and many exceptional spots are either leased, owned by a duck club, or otherwise spoken for. I'm joined today by a pair of guests who attest that even in 2025, private land hunting is achievable with hard work, the right strategies, and a whole lot of luck. Garrett Trenum is Delta's Director of Events for the South Team, a resident of Missouri with deep connections across the southern United States to the Carolinas. He's keeping unpaid hunting access alive in places where most think it's a thing of the past. As you'll hear in this episode, Garrett uses his charisma and smarts to his advantage, both at Delta fundraising events and in growing his network of potential hunting invites. And he offers a variety of clever tips, but one that's especially intriguing: how to gain occasional access to private duck clubs when otherwise doing so is financially out of reach. Then there's Brett Schaefer, a Delta volunteer and avid waterfowler from central Pennsylvania. As the owner of Grumpy Duck Company, Brett's built a name for himself through crafting eye-pleasing, lightweight, and ergonomically sound bolt handles for semi-automatic shotguns. And when it comes to hunting, Brett is just as innovative. He's never paid for access to private land, he's savvy when it comes to finding just the right spots, and he works hard to maintain permission to hunt. So stick with us as Garrett and Brett share their hard-earned tricks, some stories behind how they've found success, and advice on what it takes to find and continue to secure your duck hunting honey holes. Let's get started. Garrett Trenum, Brett Schaefer, welcome to the Delta Waterfowl podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I've said this, I think every single time I've had a coworker on as a guest. I said it's weird to call you a guest, but hey, Garrett, welcome. First time appearance on the Delta Waterfowl podcast as a Delta staffer.
Heck yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah, and then not to be overlooked, Kyle Winterstein. He's actually the producer of, let's give it an official label. Kyle's the producer of the Delta Waterfowl podcast. It's been awesome to have Kyle's help coming up with ideas and outlines and scheduling guests and, frankly, just trying to pick really good cutting-edge topics. And so, Kyle, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, the podcast is a fun, creative outlet outside of my normal print dinosaur work.
Yeah, you get to talk your words, not just type them.
Absolutely.
That's right. I see your fingers just kind of twitching though. Like, where's my keyboard?
Yes, they're nervous when they're standing still here.
Yeah. Brett Schaefer, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And then just
Excited
for
to be here.
yeah, and just for the listener, Garrett, you're in Missouri.
Correct. Yeah.
Both Brett and Kyle are in Pennsylvania.
Right.
Gotcha. Now, how far apart are you guys from each other in Pennsylvania?
About 45 minutes to an hour-ish.
Depends on who's driving.
We cross, yeah, right. We cross paths once in a while. As far as hunting territory, but never ran into him before this.
Yeah, I have to be very careful not to reveal any spots while we're on here because Brett's close enough; he can slip right in there.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, hey, for the listener, I know if you've gotten this far into the podcast, you heard the introduction, so you know what this is about. But I think just for all of us who are joining in on this discussion right now, what we're going to talk about today is tips and tactics and strategies for gaining private land hunting access. And then the other part of it is maintaining private land hunting access. We had a discussion, before we hit the record button, just kind of the background on this topic. And we talk a lot about hunter recruitment here at Delta, and a lot of people do. It's a real hot topic across the United States and Canada. And hunting has been on the decline nationally, but I think maybe in certain parts of the country, maybe it's a little bit more than others. But the leading reason why we hear that someone struggles to be a hunter or even struggles to maintain being a hunter is access. I think it's no secret. With urban sprawl, there are traditional hunting locations that are now not available to hunting whatsoever. But then also leasing, guiding, outfitting, people buying their own hunting land. It's just gotten more difficult to access private ground. And I think, Kyle and I have these conversations, and it seems to be that certain parts of the country have a reputation of knocking on a door and getting private land access is impossible. My only option is to, pay a trespass fee or lease my own land or hire a guide and outfitter, or do I have a buddy who has property, some family land or something like that? And certainly that's the treasure right there is, if you have family land or someone has family land. But we wanted to spend some time talking about just that very nature there about asking someone to hunt on their private ground. And so what can you do to tip the odds in your favor? But we'll jump into that. Is that a real thing? And I suspect it is in parts of the country. It is a real thing that it's near impossible to almost impossible to gain access to private ground. But maybe we can have a discussion, give people, the listener, some tips where they can crack open a few doors and find that place and then treasure that place and continue to hunt on that ground. But before we get into that discussion, just the tradition here on the podcast is to get to learn background about who our guests are. And Garrett, you're the first on my list, so we're going to go with you. Garrett Trenum, why don't you tell us a little bit about, yes, you work for Delta Waterfowl in our event system, but hey, where are you originally from? Has hunting always been a part of your upbringing? Tell us about yourself from maybe your childhood to here.
Sure. Yep. So lifelong waterfowl hunter, actually fifth generation waterfowl hunter within my family. So I didn't have much of a choice in being introduced and exposed to waterfowl hunting. It is interesting. I think my generation was one of the first ones where you'll run into passionate waterfowl hunters that have siblings. And like my brother, for example, he was exposed at the same amount I was, and he has little interest in it. Not opposed, but just didn't strike his fancy, right? I think some of that goes with changing social norms around hunting that we've experienced in the past 30 to 40 years. But I took to it from day one. I don't recall a time in my life where I wasn't consumed by the thought of mallards and pintails and ringnecks and watching hunting videos on VHS all the way up to YouTube now, and actually being out in the field chasing and hunting ducks. So like I said, lifelong waterfowl hunter, grew up a little bit south of Nashville in Tennessee, outside of Franklin, lived there through early high school. And then family moved to Eastern North Carolina. I finished up high school, went to college out in North Carolina, and then traveled around a little bit the first year out of college doing some sales work, and then came to Delta Waterfowl here in Missouri. And I've been here since. So that was about 9 years ago. So I've been able to live in a couple of the different flyways and experience that. Living over here in Missouri, we hunt quite a bit to the west of here into Kansas and Nebraska and Oklahoma. And so I've got to experience the Central Flyway, which has been a lot of fun. And then obviously the Mississippi Flyway and the Atlantic Flyways as well. It's been cool. It's been cool to have that perspective when I interact with waterfowl hunters that maybe haven't traveled that much or have. So
tell us a little bit about your Delta research tech experience and how, just kind of what that meant to you.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting introduction story with myself and Delta Waterfowl. I got engaged with Delta actually as a volunteer with the chapter in Raleigh when I was in college. I had met Chris Williams, the regional director at the time, working some trade shows for a decoy company that I worked for. He had come out and actually split a booth with us a couple times to talk with people about Delta Waterfowl and what the organization does and look for new volunteer chapter leads and things of that nature. And I was really drawn to Delta's science-based programmatic work that was very founded in research that backed what the organization was doing programmatically to produce ducks and secure the future of waterfowl hunting. And so when I was at college at NC State, I reached out to Chris about joining a chapter and got engaged with the Triangle chapter. That chapter experienced very rapid growth in the first 3 or so years that I was involved, not particularly due to my involvement, but they have a really crack team of diverse guys that were very passionate about waterfowl hunting. Delta had actually helped us create some big wins for waterfowl access in North Carolina at Lake Norman. The hunting had been shut down, and Delta got involved to get that reopened. And so all of us were very enthused about Delta Waterfowl and this organization that we were relatively new to at the time. I had to do an internship as part of my major in natural resources that related to my major. And at the time I had a pretty cush internship job with a forklift company where I got to sit in the air conditioning all summer and make decent money and manage some of their Walmart accounts, and wasn't really excited about having to do this internship that probably wasn't going to pay good and was going to make me go back out into the hot weather. I'd done a bunch of landscaping work growing up and thought I had moved on past that stage, but I reached out to Chris and he said, "Hey, come work for Delta. Come be a research tech for the summer and study predator management with us." And so I talked to Mike Buxton and interviewed for the job, and got hired on and drove up to northeastern North Dakota and spent the summer doing predator management research, nest success research up on the prairies. Most of that was, a little bit north of Devil's Lake in North Dakota. And then we also did some time in southern Saskatchewan studying the impacts of predator management. So that was really cool. It allowed me, as a volunteer fundraiser for an organization that I was really excited about, to see the organization from the inside out, to see the fiscal responsibility of the organization, to interact more with the organization's leaders like Frank Rower and John Devney. They would come out and do donor tours where they would bring donors out to see the programmatic work that Delta was doing, to meet these research techs, to learn more about how much of an impact predator management was having on duck production. And then also see that impact firsthand. We had one half section there north of Devil's Lake that we marked like 1,200 duck nests on that super field that had been trapped for multiple years in a row. And a lot of ducks were returning there to nest, and they were having phenomenal nest success there because there were no mesopredators on that block to depredate nests. I want to say the nest success rate just on that one half section was over 80% that year. And then a lot of the areas that we were studying that we did not have trappers, that were the non-trapped and the control blocks, they were seeing nest success below 5%. And so it's very eye-opening to see that juxtaposition of trapped versus non-trapped, how much of an impact that was having, physically hold those duck eggs in my hand and candle them and know that those ducks were going to hatch out, we're going to migrate south, and we're going to be over duck hunters' decoy spreads because of the work Delta was doing. It really locked me in for life as a Delta supporter. And so a couple of years after that, when I had the opportunity to come to Delta to work here, I jumped at it, and it's been an awesome experience ever since.
Sweet. Thank you for that. We often, I think it's 24 years for me on the job, and I don't get to hear the other side. Someone comes, they work, they leave. I don't get to see. So it's great to have you staying at Delta for so long, because that's a valuable experience. Some of those, we bring people to the prairies, Garrett, from time to time, to owners, chapters, other volunteers, and it's easy to take for granted finding a duck nest and holding those eggs in your hand. And I think even on top of that, when you're holding an egg as it's starting to hatch,
Yep.
I don't know if you ever got to experience that, but it's
Oh, yeah.
kind of like
Yep.
holding a seashell. It's our version of a seashell to your ears, and just that sound of that little duckling scratching its way out, and it's quite an experience. So awesome. Well, Brett, can you beat that? Can you follow that introduction?
No, not quite.
I think you can. Yeah, I think you can.
I was late into the waterfowl game. I was always a lifelong fisherman, and one of the guys I fished with was a duck hunter. And he took me a few times, and then work and life kind of took me out of it. And then actually buying a Boykin Spaniel, my hunting dog, about 10 years ago is what got me into it. Living in Pennsylvania, Kyle can attest, we have some ducks, but it's nothing people are really going to travel to see. So we just picked away at small creeks and rivers and just got into it. And a guy I met at my first hunt test actually really got me into it. One of those friends on Instagram, and he, said, "Hey, you going to come duck hunt?" And I went down. The first time I got to experience Chesapeake Bay. All the marshes had frozen up, and we got out, did some like old school body boot and stuff, and just with a homemade rig, probably saw 40,000 ducks on my first hunt. And it was just like the most unbelievable thing. and from there, and then starting this company about 5 years ago is really where I got into the industry. But yeah, started out turkey hunting with my dad is my first hunting, and around Pennsylvania we were deer hunters. Took me a long time to figure out I really just don't enjoy sitting in a deer stand by myself. So the public aspect, the group hunting, and largely it was just hunting with my dog. At the beginning is I would go just to take him because it's like I knew he'd want to go. So it was it was a slow start, and now it's being in the industry is and having some of the opportunities I've had to travel to hunt. It's just been absolutely unreal.
So the dog came first?
Uh, I mean, I'd waterfowl hunted a little bit, but yeah, um, Huckleberry, my Boykin Spaniel, he's really the catalyst to me being a waterfowl hunter at all. Because I would have never gone to these hunt tests to meet these people. And, and that's kind of what we'll get into is like a lot of this gaining access is it's who who your network is, how big is your network, and the dog world has been a huge one for me. So, but yeah, he's really the key behind it. So,
No, I think that's a lot of I've heard a lot of stories where it's the dog that got me into it, right? I didn't realize that my dog had these instincts. My mind has been open to hunting, but the dog was the real gateway. But then I think for others that if you've had hunting dogs for years or for most of your hunting career, if you want to call it a career, when you lose that dog, it can be have an opposite effect. Yeah, I went about 3 years. Man, I was at the peak of traveling for work. I had horses, two tiny little kids, lost my hunting dog of 13 years. And I didn't have a dog for 3 years, and it took a whole lot of the wind out of my sails. And then all of a sudden, life started to become not easy by any means with two little kids running around in that equation, but it became easier to insert a dog. And he's sleeping in my office right now. But he's almost 13, so life is about to repeat itself.
that's it.
Yeah. So do you do a little bit of training too with Boykins?
Just personally, I'm no dog trainer. Yeah, I've trained Huckleberry and Ruby are both they're my Boykins. I trained them. I put them through everything as far as the formal training goes. They were force fetched by the trainer breeder, Phil Hinchman, Brandywine Creek. Give him a little shout out. Yeah, they were force fetched by him, but I've done all the other training. Huckleberry, we ran NARA and HRC stuff. Ruby ran some NARA stuff, but she's just a little hunting dog. So, but yeah, it's been fun. It was a great world. I hope to get back into it again. I have a little boy now, and when I got into training, one of the older guys told me, he said, we always get guys and they're obsessed with it and they get a dog and they want to be a trainer. And he said, then they disappear for about 10 years when they have kids and they don't have any time to do it. And he's like, then they come back with a 10-year-old and, he's training too. So he's like, we get guys, we lose them, and then they'll come back eventually. So
sweet. I would love to hear a little bit about the inspiration for your company, Grumpy Duck.
Grumpy Duck, yeah.
And what you offer. Yeah, I know. Kyle shared with me, at the expo, we've had 3 of them so far. The one upcoming in Oklahoma City, and I get so busy at those things that I haven't been able to walk around the show floor. So I admit to missing. You've been at all 3 expos. Tell us about Grumpy Duck.
So Grumpy Duck was an idea I had in 2019, and it was one of those, like, I'd shot a banded duck and then we were out hunting, shot a banded black duck in a field, not too near here, but Pennsylvania. So it was a cool, and we don't have them too often. So it was banded in Canada, and so I wanted to do something special with the band. And I was, I only had 2 on my lanyard. It's one of those I wanted to do something different. My dad's a machinist. And so I took the idea to him. I said, hey, can you make me a handle? And I had an M2 20 gauge and drew up a little prototype. First one he made out of steel. And I said, nah, that's not, change this and this. And can we make it lighter? And he had a piece of titanium there. And so he made 4 prototypes based on that first one, just for Benelli's. And out of those 4 prototypes, I took one to the guy who took me hunting on the Chesapeake the first time. So one was for my dad, one was for me, and then two buddies. And my buddy down the Chesapeake, Billy, it was every couple of days he'd call me and he's like, "Man, can you make more of these?" He's like, "Everybody that sees it wants one." So, and it's a plug and play part. It's a bolt handle for a semi-auto shotgun. And yeah, the most popular model, we have a duck band wrapped around it, but they're made and stamped by National Band. It's the company that makes every real duck band, so they're the realest fakes you can get. So it's just a banded handle, and we do 5 or 6 models, lots of engraving options. And at the Delta Expos, we only sell them there, but we have the Delta logo engraved on the end of a bunch of different models. So, but yeah, it's just a little part, and like I said, it was one of those side gigs. I wanted to sell a couple hundred a year just to fund my hobby, and it's one of those that it just blew up, and it happened around COVID. Lost my job through that. Just I was working oil and gas landman work, and you can't go to the courthouses, you can't work. So, and this picked up at the same time, and just been doing it ever since. It's like I haven't had a real job in 5 years.
It is a real job. It is a real job. You
Yeah,
took on
it
the risk.
is.
That's a real job
But
right there.
it's too much fun to call it a real job.
Yeah, grumpy duck.
So
I just typed that
that's
into Google and found it easy.
good.
Probably not too
Yeah.
many businesses competing for that.
Yeah. The name was along, because I had the product long before the name, and tried to come up with a bunch of different things. And my wife didn't. Once we had Grumpy Duck, my buddy, wanted it. And my wife shot it down initially because she said it was too fitting. So
I was going to say you seem like a happy guy to be calling your business Grumpy Duck, but
well, yeah, early mornings can be rough.
that's your alter ego.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, perfect. Well, all right. Well, thank you very much for those introductions, guys. Kyle, you've had the opportunity to tell your story, but if this is a first-time listener, Kyle's the editor of Delta Waterfowls magazine. Been with Delta how long?
Gosh, coming up on 11 years now.
15 with Windchill, maybe? No, it's been all good.
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Okay, moving on. So what we're going to get into now, we're going to start talking about private land access. And so I think what I'd like to do is, Garrett, you're in Missouri, but what part of the world do you feel, Garrett, that you're an expert at this topic? Would you restrict it to Missouri, or do you have other places where you're like, yeah, I've hunted these locations a lot, or through the event system, I've got this dialed in? What would you speak for?
Yeah, I would start with the disclaimer that I primarily hunt public ground, and we can dive into the why of that through the conversation. But I do get an opportunity multiple times a year to hunt private ground, either through invites or I don't know what the right term would be, maybe like freelance door knocking access on some level. But as you get over into the Midwest, and we've discussed this off air a little bit, that door knocking mentality that I think a lot of guys get from hunting maybe up on the prairies, if they do like a freelance trip to the Dakotas or to southern Canada, where you can just go find birds in an area, look up the owner on a plat map, go knock on their door, and oh my gosh, yeah, please come hunt. That'd be great. That disappears rapidly as you go south in the Mississippi and Central Flyways, in my experience. To say that it goes away 100%, I think, is a unfair statement, but it gets excessively harder due to a variety of reasons. As you move south, a lot of the land is going to be leased up already. There's also, with the higher demand closer to population centers, there's more and more there's more hunters in the area, and so there's more concern on behalf of the landowners about negative impacts to their property, be it somebody getting hurt or tearing up property, leaving a gate open, things of that nature. So they may tell you that the land's leased, but in my experience, that may not always be the case. It may just be that they don't want people there, and that's an easy out for them to move on past the conversation. But that being said, I hunt public and private land from on a week-to-week basis from Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, a little bit in Illinois. So kind of the states surrounding Missouri, I would say, would be a fair statement. But
so how do you feel, I guess, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being private land being wide open, easily accessible? Let's go to a 1 where you're not going to get on private ground. Talk about Missouri. How would you portray that?
I guess you would need to define access more clearly. If it's whatever land you want to get on where you find birds you get access to, I'd say it's very low. But if you're a waterfowl hunter that just says, hey, I'm on a tight budget, I simply don't have the funds or the inclination to want to lease land, and I want to hunt on private land in the coming years, I think it's very easy to get some quality access secured by communicating and networking with landowners.
Okay, cool. No, that is an important distinction. Yeah, I think like here in North Dakota, if you want to jump in your truck and you want to go scouting for ducks, and your strategy is to find the biggest flock of mallards, find out where they feed, go knock on a door, a lot of other guys are going to do that too. Guys and gals are going to do that too. So that's that's rolling the dice. But yeah, now if you're being proactive, looking for some ground with potential, or maybe you're not after the mother lode and you're happy just to go. Yeah, I would say that's a very similar situation. How about you, Brett? When you're talking to where do you have most of your hunting experience in your perspective on private land access?
Private land, specifically Pennsylvania. Yeah, not a lot of door knocking for me on out of state. I mean, I've done it in North Dakota, but to his point is it's a different world when you're doing it up there. It doesn't compute well. I mean, the same attitude is like state your intentions, doing it ahead of time would be handy, but mainly here in Pennsylvania is where my experience is for waterfowl and for other game.
Okay. For ducks in particular, how do you feel like if that same scale, 10 being it's really easy to get on private ground to hunt ducks and 1 being almost impossible? How do you feel about Pennsylvania?
Probably in the middle, like 5. It's really tough. In some areas, like it's different communities of people, and like I can tell you, like the attitude in my valley versus the next valley over is different, just with landowners and how they're protective or not, who they let on. Like some people, they don't say no, so it's easy on some farms, but is it worth hunting then? So it's kind of the trick, because we're hunting very small tracts. I mean, there's a big farm around here is 200-300 acres. So you're if they jump one field over, it's a new property.
Okay, yeah, and maybe I'll take a turn, Kyle. I don't want to dismiss you. Well, how about this? You get to be the follow-up guy for Brett. We invited Brett on, so he gets the lead Pennsylvania perspective. But what are your thoughts on Pennsylvania?
Yeah, I think even within Pennsylvania, it can vary so much where you're at in our state in terms of your access. If you're down in the southeast corner of the state where you've got the Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area, which is a huge draw for staging. Well, it's not really known for snow geese and Canada geese, but gets a lot of ducks as well. I mean, those areas, there are leases down in the southeast corner, and it's very competitive in terms of private access. Where I'm at, outside of State College, right in the middle of the state, the biggest barrier to private access is, we're going to talk about this, just mustering the courage to knock on a random landowner's door and disturb his, for her Saturday morning. I have found that generally if I make the introduction where I'm at, and it's not a terribly competitive waterfowl area, and I don't mention any interest in deer or turkeys, which is really easy for deer because I literally have no interest in their deer. I tend to get a yes or minimally a maybe, and it's someone to follow up with. And yeah, it's interesting. One other thought that came up is I hear about what Garrett mentioned. The farther south you go, the more competitive it gets, the more difficult it gets to get that, old school knock on the door, shake somebody's hand, hunt their land. That's a rare opportunity. So I don't know. There's something to be said for our state, Brett. I mean, you mentioned how it's not like we have ducks that people are traveling to come hunt, but I know places within 5, 10, 15 minutes where our season's out now, but where any given day I can go shoot 2 ducks before work. Like I have places I can access and go. And I don't know, there's times when I prefer that to if I'm in Arkansas, and I just saw a video on quick shout out to Colin Kearns at Field and Stream. These guys on horseback going into the public land, race to the spots. I was just like, man, I don't want to do that. I mean, you have way more ducks than us, but it's supply and demand. I guess we have access opportunities, and you can still get handshake agreement access here.
I would chase up, I guess, accessing private land and maintaining access to private land. That's something that I guess I have taken pride in. It's been my secret pride, because I mentioned before, I don't really like to. It's a blessing and a curse. Hunters are naturally secretive, right? We're naturally secretive, and so to give somebody tips on how to go be successful, or give somebody tips on how to go find land that might be the land that you hunt on. So we're naturally secretive people. But I think this discussion is we're giving up our perspectives for the greater good, right? And if people quit hunting because they're struggling to find access, that's not a good thing. And I think when you have a bad hunting season, or you've had a lot of difficulty on crowded public land, you might say, hey, hunting is, fewer hunters might be nice, but we kind of have to take that big picture approach. There's strength in numbers. We could go on to that for quite a bit of time. But I grew up in Wisconsin. I haven't hunted there for about 20 years, so I would only be able to remember, what it was like. And we did hunt a lot of private ground there, but duck hunting wasn't as popular where I grew up, so I think there was not a lot of competition for private ground. But jumping into western Minnesota, jumping into North Dakota, South Dakota, and Prairie Canada, I would say I would have to agree with you, Garrett. If someone is thinking about coming up to that part of the world or my part of the world, I would say that if you just want to go get a piece of private ground and go duck hunting, and you're not really discerning about it having the mother load of ducks, and you're just looking for potential, I think it's a 10. I think you can come up to the Dakotas, you can come up to Canada. If that's your filter, I'm just looking for a place to go, it's a 10. You can absolutely go find a place to hunt. It does deteriorate rapidly when you're looking for the mother load. The mother load of, it's a little easier if you're looking for a water hunt of gadwall, teal, shoveler, just the mix of, I just want to shoot a dog's breakfast of ducks. Gets a little bit easier there, or maybe even quite a bit easier. But the most difficult is I'm looking for this giant field of mallards, and that can be in parts of the Dakotas and Prairie Canada. That's a 1. It's almost impossible. It's either leased up, or, like I said, I think the number one reason, I have somebody coming, or somebody got there first. So it absolutely ranges from that 1 to 10. What I'd be curious, I think I'm 50. I don't know. Am I probably the oldest one on this podcast? Maybe. Yes, I'm the oldest. So I don't know if we all have, what time perspective you guys might have, but I'm curious as well. And maybe this one we'll just kind of talk on a national perspective. But over the course of my life, absolutely, when I first started waterfowl hunting, I'd say it was really easy to get access to private ground, and it's dramatically changed over time in my part of the world. Absolutely dramatically changed. I can think of, I'd say it was kind of the mid 2000s here in North Dakota. My strategy was I'd go out scouting, and I'd find 4 or 5 spots to hunt in one night, and I'd secure the permission, sometimes with public land. I didn't have to, of course, and then I would hunt those spots the next 4 or 5 days. For me, the light switched, and it changed overnight. Had my 4 spots that I just scouted the night before, and I went out to hunt. I went to my first spot, and there were taillights. Second spot, third spot, fourth spot. All of them were hunted by other people. And it was a mix of resident and non-resident, but it was absolutely a sign of things to come. And for me, it changed overnight, where people started getting more competitive, people sleeping in the blind, parking trucks at a dummy truck, at a field approach, to give people the impression that there were already hunters there. But Garrett, how about you? What do you think about what's the trend that you've experienced in your lifetime with private land access?
I would agree with that. I started hunting in the late 90s, early 2000s, where I feel like some of that pendulum swing really started to occur. And so I never experienced a time personally, even when I've hunted up in Saskatchewan and the Dakotas, where it was just turnkey, easy to get on ground with no connection to the landowner at all, right? Even initially when we were going to Saskatchewan, it was tough at times until we built relationships with farmers up there that trusted us and could vouch for us, and we could name drop them when we were asking for permission. And then it became significantly easier. So it's always been a bit of a long game in my experience and in my lifetime, getting access to private land for waterfowl hunting. At the same time, I don't know that it's gotten significantly worse. Like your perspective is, it may have gotten a little bit tougher, but not significantly in my experience. The same amount of effort as we were putting in the early 2000s when I was a kid would yield similar results these days from what I've seen.
Okay. How about you, Brett?
Probably the same. Like I said, and leasing is kind of starting. There's a couple fields around that people have paid money to hunt just to have a place to go. They don't have to worry about it. But yeah, and like I said, I haven't been doing it that long, but if you put in the effort, you'll find some places to hunt for sure around here. And it's kind of the problem we have is how many other people have those same accesses. So
Okay. One question that I'd like to have for each one of you guys, and I'll just dip into North Dakota, for example. In North Dakota, not our entire state doesn't have ringneck pheasants. In the southern parts of the state, we have really, awesome ringneck pheasant populations. Your typical landowner in North Dakota hunts white-tailed deer. So white-tailed deer are more difficult to access on private ground. Some hunt ringneck pheasants. So then in that part of the world, pheasants are difficult to secure for private land access. But your typical landowner in North Dakota doesn't hunt waterfowl. So to me, that's the number one reason why that land is even accessible in the first place. And now we're talking about other pressures. We're talking about other people with permission. We're talking about some leasing, some guiding and outfitting. But how would you guys characterize the typical landowner from a waterfowl hunting perspective in your part of the world? Is a typical landowner a duck hunter?
not in my world. Very few people around here are waterfowl hunters at all. So most of them aren't even aware they're there, or that some of them might be like, oh yeah, I saw some the other day and there's 200 back there or something. But yeah.
That was my thought when I knock on doors here. They're like, oh, ducks? I haven't seen ducks. I'm like, you got freaking hundreds of ducks down on that creek right now.
Okay. How about you, Garrett?
I would say it's very different in Missouri, Arkansas, and even a lot out in Kansas. Whereas specifically, like the caveat we gave earlier, if you're just driving around and you find a ton of ducks on an area, odds are they're there because that area is being intensively managed for waterfowl habitat to provide hunting access, and that landowner either is a duck hunter or they're making money off of that ground by leasing it to waterfowl hunters on some level. Can you find areas that aren't intensively managed that have good ducks on them? And when you do, yeah, maybe the landowner's not a waterfowl hunter, but in a lot of cases, the good duck properties, the best hunting areas are owned by people that are either waterfowl hunters themselves or have a vested interest in waterfowl hunting.
So we're talking about a very uneven playing field here. I think we just kind of identified a gradient, and it is a bit of a north to or south to north gradient, perhaps, and maybe it slides over to the west too. But it does seem like the further south you go in your travels, that, like you just said there, Garrett, the waterfowl property is there because somebody wanted it to be so. And so right off the gate, right out of the bat, it's not even. I think I mixed up my metaphors. Right out of the bat, right out of the gate. I got that one wrong. That's funny. But that land wasn't even accessible in the first place. And so as you slide to the north, get into the Dakotas, you get into Prairie Canada. Yeah, those are naturally occurring properties. They weren't created, they weren't maintained for duck hunting, by the landowner. It just is something that you happen to. So when you knock on that door and you ask the landowner, in other words, you're kind of asking, is me accessing, are you finding value in something that I'm asking for? And most of the time they say no, or that it's not something that they value. So that now, if they do say no, it's for a whole other list of variables. But in a lot of the prime wintering duck, locations of the United States. I do agree with that, Garrett. That's property that somebody put in place and is controlling access for their own use or their own circle of friends. Okay. Well, this one might be, if we move a little bit further down the funnel, what are you guys' thoughts on how do you, if you're going to go out there and say, I'm going to go find some private ground that I want to go, I have a hunting location. Do you guys have any tips or tools, apps? How do you guys go about finding public land? Is it just your social circle, or do you go out wandering?
You're asking public or private? You just said
Private.
public. Is that
Sorry,
private?
I meant the
Okay.
private. Yeah.
No, you're good. Private land, it's you can use the rifle or the shotgun approach, right? You can the rifle approach to me would be to identify a specific piece of property, which is generally going to come from some level of scouting, right? Holy cow, there's a pile of ducks right there. Well, then I start leveraging, like you just talked about, apps, Hunt Stand, Onyx, these apps that leverage publicly accessible data through tax maps and provide that to you at the touch of a finger on a smartphone to look up who the landowner is. You can search their tax address and see if that's a local address, go knock on their door. You could even, run their name through a white pages search to figure out if maybe there's a phone number you could call them on. And touch base. That can be productive. It's a lot more pointed. And I think that's the way a lot of guys think when it comes to accessing private ground. But I think there's also a shotgun or cast net approach of, just leveraging the networks that you're within and making sure people know, hey, I'm looking for some spots to duck hunt. If you know of anybody that's got, some river bottom ground or, a marsh on their property or some cattle ponds or whatever it may be where you're seeing waterfowl on a local level, put those feelers out there. That can be incredibly productive because you've generally got some type of a touch point within that network to leverage. Like, hey, my buddy Bill that I work with told me that you have some property, and Bill could potentially vouch for you, and things of that nature. That can be an incredibly productive way to find access in an area that the traditional door knocking method isn't as productive.
And not necessarily kind of a shameless plug for your event system, Garrett, but I have seen people at my local Delta event banquet networking and finding spots, especially newer guys, or and even tips for public land. But if you're new to waterfowling, or even if you're a seasoned guy, go to your Delta banquet and make some hellos. For
even better, volunteer and join those network of passionate waterfowl hunters, and there you'll have an opportunity to prove yourself face to face to those guys. If you show up and you start helping them move the needle on what this chapter is trying to accomplish, you're going to build immediate trust, and the invites are inevitable at that point.
Yeah. And the dog angle is great that Brett had mentioned. I mean, I think it speaks to the quality of Brett's Boykins that actually expanded his network. I've seen dogs that resulted in the opposite effect for certain people. Yeah. I've hunted over a dog or two I wouldn't feed. But,
Right.
And I'll say one last thing, I'll shut up and defer back to our guests, is the Onyx and Hunt Stand, man, a couple thoughts. I do feel like the fact that there are really no secret spots anymore has impacted the romance of it all, that you can just sit and scroll and find the water. I also won't scout without those apps because they are so helpful. And so, I feel like you're handicapping yourself without them. And what I have found is when I give you that landowner's name, and sometimes Google will tell you a little about this person, how to get in touch with them, and what might be the least intrusive time for you to make the knock and the introduction. So technology, I have a love-hate relationship with it in many respects, but it can be very helpful to scouting.
It is hard. There's a few things that have changed in my life. Growing up in the north, ice fishing has always been a big part of my life, and so the use of a Vexilar. I don't know if you've never ice fished, you probably don't have a reason to, but it's basically a color coded sonar. Put it in the hole that you drilled for ice fishing, and you can see whether there's fish in there, and you can actually see where your bait is. So you don't have to wonder if there's fish below you that just aren't biting. And so you use that sucker, and it's almost impossible now for me to go ice fishing without a Vexilar because I don't know. I just want to know, and I guess it's the same thing with Hunt Stand or Onyx, any of those things too. It's just why handicap yourself with something without something like that. Brett, how about you? How about your part of the world?
Kind of what Garrett said was, it's for me, a lot of times it's the rifle approach, is like I'm finding spots or birds, and knocking on a lot of doors, and it's just building those relationships up over years is really what it is. Maintaining them's the real art of it. But yeah, it's you have a lot of spots, and especially when you're hunting little water like we are, there's only so many streams, creeks, or spots along the river. So either you're going to go sit and just hope something flies by, or you're going to go scout the X, and if you're 50 yards off, you're not going to shoot a duck. They're all going to land above you or below you. So it's getting the right permission. So most of the time I know exactly where I want to be and where I need to be, and so it's usually following the birds and then going from there. And from there, it's then, you on a stretch of stream, you have multiple different permissions. Some places you can hunt, some places you can't. And, you just got to maintain all those different ones and scout them accordingly.
One of the things that I've noticed is that, and I think it's just kind of human nature, you're looking for a place to hunt. You're looking for the biggest, baddest hunting location that you can find. You want the huge buck. You want hundreds of pheasants to flush in front of you. You want thousands of ducks to come down in front of you. One of my strategies, which I would encourage anybody to use, is I go the opposite side of it. I look at the spot. What's the hardest spot to get to? That's actually been the single greatest success tip I could give anybody. Find the hardest spot to find. Find the smallest place to hunt. And if I'm pheasant hunting, I look for the smallest, oddest area, because that everybody's going to drive by. Or I go to the spot, look for the spot that nobody's going to get to. One of the tips that I had here, and I don't think it really works anymore, but when I first moved to North Dakota, when we had paper maps, I would take like a drafting compass, one of those, stick a pin in it and a pencil on the other side, and then I would go to every city in North Dakota or town in North Dakota that had a hotel. And I would draw a 30-mile radius circle around that town, and I would never scout inside of that 30 miles. Because I thought, my lived experience is, a hunter comes from out of state, stays in the hotel, they wouldn't drive much farther than 30 miles to go look. Now, I don't know that really works anymore. Plus, there's a lot of houses scattered across the countryside that hunters can rent now. So I don't know that it works, but it worked for years. Finding a spot that was far. You had to walk a half mile to get to it. Couldn't drive a truck, couldn't drive a four-wheeler, things like that. And then also just staying at least 30 miles outside of any place with a hotel. So I think that tip, though, can apply to anywhere you live. Look for that spot that is just, it's either too obvious, too small, too far, something. My dad always said walking isn't crowded. And I think that's such a true statement. The harder you have to work for something is, I think, the less accessible it's going to be. When you guys getting access to private ground, it all comes down to, you have to ask permission. Do you guys, there's a lot of anxiety doing that, I think, for a lot of people. So especially in an area where you go, yep, you're not going to get private land access. Why do you think people don't ask permission?
I mean, it's fear of being turned down. It's the fear of the no. Why didn't you ask the hottest girl in high school out on a date, right? Maybe you did, and if you did, you probably got to go on a date, right? But a lot of guys won't do it because the fear of being turned down. So I think that's it. I think a lot of times when I interact with people that say, like, man, I've never been able to get access on private ground in Missouri, I say, oh, fair enough. When's the last time you asked somebody for permission? Oh, like, okay, well, there's your problem, right? You got to ask, you got to make the ask, you got to let people know that you're looking for it. You got to, network. It's fairly simple for people that are wired that way. But if you're not out there asking, you don't expect for it to just fall in your lap, right?
Yeah, I think there is a fair bit of anxiety, and there are ways to make the odds increase in your favor. How about you, Brett? Do you feel like it's just that reluctance, of rejection, or what do you
Yeah,
think?
I always said the worst. No, the worst they can say is no. But I probably just that driving up, knocking on the door. But like Kyle said, hedging your bets is the time you stop by. Around here, we don't ask on Sundays ever. You don't disturb anybody on a Sunday in our valley. It's just the way it is. So knowing what you're walking into. A lot of people are farmers. They're busy. You don't want to waste their time or, interrupt them at some point. But yeah, it's probably just afraid of the wrong landowner or the horror stories that's ever so rare. I mean, I knocked on a lot of doors in my oil and gas time, and that was a lot more contentious than this. So, and I no horror stories to be told from any of them.
Yeah, yeah. I think the other part too is the time of year that you ask, right? In my part of the world, I can drive down the road and can say that is a good deer property and will always be a good deer property, right? And I can say that same thing for pheasants, but I can't say that for ducks. If I'm talking about not many people hunt big marshes here in the prairies. One, there just aren't a lot of them, right? And they tend not to be the most productive hunts anyway. They certainly can be, but it's tough. Like duck hunting, when we're out there looking for a duck hunting spot on private ground, there are very few locations where you just go back to it every year and have that bang up hunt. Something may change, water conditions may change, cropping patterns may change, so that changes the upland foraging behavior of ducks in the fall. And then also you'll just have bumper crops of aquatic invertebrates that may pop up in a particular wetland. So what I'm trying to get at is the duck distribution in the hunting season of North Dakota it changes every year. So to go out in the summer and say, hey, may I duck hunt on your property this fall? That would be the ultimate. But you're probably asking permission, wasted permission, so to speak, for 60 to 70% of the property that you just got access to. So that really works for deer and turkeys and pheasants and things like that here. Brett, in your part of the world, is a good duck hunting property, is that predictable? Is it a place that you just go, where do I want to go today?
Somewhat. Yeah, they're in, even like some fields are just, they historically get birds, even though we're not working with large populations. We have some birds around, we get some migrate, but it's like there's certain fields where you could go set up in and have a good shoot. And there's certain stretches of streams, the birds, they have some safe areas, and when they come out, they go to certain areas, and it's you can walk a lot of stream and not see any other birds scouting or anything, but it's in certain areas it's pretty specific.
Okay, so you do have some spots where maybe you could go out there in the summer and ask for
Yeah,
permission.
yes, 100%. Certain spots you could check, and but they're known. For us, yeah, summertime scouting would be just getting access to the creek that you think might hold ducks. And we've done that before, of like, hey, could we have permission to come back and check this out in the fall? Not during deer season or anything like that, just to walk the property, just to see if it has anything. We found a really good wood duck spot doing that, actually. But.
Yeah. I think Garrett, what we're getting at, Garrett, here obviously is that, I'll just put it into words. The worst time to get hunting permission is when you want to go hunt, that evening, the next morning. That's the worst time, right? Because they're getting, one, it's just not showing that, that forethought, the courtesy. Maybe the landowner might see it as a courtesy that you gave them, time without pressure to think about it. But also in the fall, if you're trying to access, farmland, farmers are busy, right? And so you're literally bothering them. So Garrett, in your part of the world or south of you, is securing permission or trying? Are there those durable locations that happen year after year on private ground in your part of the world?
Yes, but it very, to the point that saying never, I don't think is an extreme. It may not be accurate, but knocking on doors is not how you're going to consistently secure access to high quality waterfowl properties in Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana, right? Never say never. It could definitely happen, but generally it's not, and especially not during waterfowl season, right? when I see, both myself and a lot of the volunteers that I work with that are accessing high quality waterfowl hunting areas, it is through some sort of an exchange of services type access. I think back to when I started this job, one of my chairmen owned and managed a small duck club in Northeast Arkansas, and he had some pretty good spots. And he was a really good dude, and I was the Delta RD, but I can't just assume that, hey, you're a Delta volunteer, I'm going to come hunt whenever I want down there, right? And so anytime I got invited to his camp, I would cook dinner and clean dishes afterwards, right? And so I got a couple more invites than a normal person would, right? Hey, what are you doing this weekend? We got some hunters in camp. You want to maybe come down? What time are you showing up Friday? Oh, 5 o'clock. That'd be perfect. You bring it? Yeah, I got dinner. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, good. Look forward to seeing you. And then I talked with them. I wanted to hunt there more often and more consistently without having to ask every time. And I said, hey, what do you need that I could provide to get a few days each year down here at the club? And he needs pits brushed before duck season. He needs decoys set out, and I mentioned earlier in the podcast, I used to work for a decoy company. And so I'm very comfortable with repainting waterfowl decoys. And I went through and repainted most of his decoys one summer. And he was like, you're a member at this point. Come whenever you want. Just give me a heads up. Right. And it cost me maybe $100 in paint and a weekend, go down there, stay at the club and go through all the decoys and get them repainted. Right. I think that's a very accessible approach for a lot of people that are waterfowl hunters that want access, but just don't have it in their budget to join a duck club, right? That can be a pretty significant jump to get that secure access to quality waterfowl hunting. We've got a chapter in St. Louis, and the St. Charles Bottoms is one of the largest concentration, if not the largest concentration of duck clubs in the world, right? And so tell somebody that they can go knock on a door down there in the St. Charles Bottoms, get access to a private duck club is asinine, right? It's not going to happen. But we've got volunteers that are blue collar guys, younger guys that get to hunt some of the top duck clubs in the world because they take on a role as what's called a caretaker for the year, right? And they're the ones that's brushing the blinds before season. They're the ones that are, helping put boards in and turn the pumps on or pull boards off at the end of duck season and get the water out of the pools. Or they're the ones that are guiding the club members and calling ducks, and they bring their dog out and they let the duck club members shoot ducks. And if it's a real nasty day and nobody can get on the roads, guess who gets to go duck hunting those blinds? It's those caretakers get that access to some really high quality waterfowl hunting properties for very little monetary cost, right? It costs them their time. It costs them their sweat and their hands that are bleeding from getting cut by corn stalks when they're, brushing blinds and stuff, but they didn't have to come out of their pocket for that access. And so to me, that shows that it's there. It looks a little different. It looks different than driving up and talking with a, 70-year-old man about, hey, can I hunt your back 40? But I think the access opportunity is still there for the people that are willing to roll up their sleeves and dig in a little bit.
That's a really good perspective. I'm glad you brought that up. And I'm on this trend of describing gradients, and you just hit me with kind of a new one. I think maybe the further south you go, you're looking to hunt with someone on private land, where the farther,
Right.
maybe the far north you go, the more opportunity it is to access land for yourself. And does that seem to be a reasonable gradient?
Know that it's so much a north-south gradient. I think it is just due to the population centers within the U.S., then also that wintering aspect where, ducks are going to tend to show up on those wintering areas at some point and be there and be accessible for hunters. And so hunting is more popular down there, I would argue, just even with the locals, right? It's hard to argue that, residents of North Dakota are as passionate about duck hunting as residents of Louisiana, right? It's just a little bit different social norms in those two areas. But there's a lot of this door knocking access maybe outside of the hotspot areas, right? If you get into eastern Arkansas, Mississippi Alluvial Valley, rice country, the Grand Prairie, that stuff, it's just not going to be there. If there's water on a rice field, it's because they had a significant rain event or somebody paid a lot of money to pump it to put water in front of their pit blind, right? That being said, you get up into the, northwest Arkansas or central Arkansas outside of that Mississippi Alluvial Valley where waterfowl hunting is not as popular. There are some of those access points. I can speak specifically for the Missouri Ozarks. There can be some phenomenal waterfowl hunting to be had, not as consistently, and maybe not the numbers you're going to see in those more popular areas, but you can go out and have some phenomenal duck hunts on some areas that are very unassuming, and you can have that door knock access opportunity, right? but it's not going to be on an area that's intensively managed. It's not going to be on an area that's holding tens of thousands of ducks for weeks at a time, where you can just go back and go back and go back time and time again and have that type of an access, if that makes sense. So I think it's more to do with the hotspot areas where there's a lot of duck hunting pressure and a lot of waterfowl hunting staged up for a significant amount of time versus just a strictly north to south gradient.
Would it be fair to say, Garrett? Well, not fair to say. Just let me ask the question. It occurs. It comes across to me like the further south you go, if you're asking permission to hunt on private ground, you're asking another duck hunter. Where, if here where I am, the prairies of Canada, I'm not asking permission from a duck hunter. I'm asking permission from a landowner who has very little interest in waterfowl. Does that seem to be a fair description of the southern situation or not?
I think there's probably a line when you get out of those prairies where there is a excess of naturally available high quality waterfowl habitat in the dry fields and the prairie sloughs that you see up in the prairies. And you get into that, about when you start coming into outside of northern Iowa, you'll start to run into that aspect we've talked about where if there's a bunch of waterfowl there, it's for a reason, right? Somebody has put in effort to provide that habitat for them. So I think that's more what it is than just a north-south gradient, because I'm thinking, northwest Missouri around Squaw Creek is going to be very similar to southern Louisiana when it comes to knocking on doors. And those are drastically far apart on that north to south gradient. But I think it's because those are waterfowl hunting areas. They hold significant amounts of waterfowl for periods of time through the season. And the habitat is being intensively managed to provide hunting opportunity and wetland habitat for waterfowl.
Okay. Brett, how about your part of the world? Are you asking permission from friends? You asking permission from what's the nature of the land that you're getting access to?
Pennsylvania, a lot of small tracts, and a lot of it is through friend. But when I started, we were, you'd knock on every farmer's door that had water running through it, to check it. And here is very, very different. I've hunted with a friend down on the Eastern Shore quite a bit, and that sounds more like what Garrett describes in Missouri. Is every piece of property that has waterfowl, they're there for a reason. It's leased, or it's, the landowner. There's a lot of people buying recreational property. They're buying it specifically for whatever marsh access it has, or waterfowl impoundments, things like that. So, yeah, here it seems to be more pointed as far as the approach and, getting just knocking on every door, but don't discount your network, your work network. And I can't tell you how many places we have permission to hunt, and you go to ask, and every year does anybody else hunt it? Has anybody else asked permission? Because I want to know what I might walk into. And it's, well, so-and-so from church asked our friend, and, they're hunting it too. So that's kind of, you can get access anyway. And I do have a friend on the Eastern Shore, exactly what Garrett said, is he gets permission on a lot of places because he talks to a lot of people. And when they say, oh, well, would you help do this? He goes out and does it. He doesn't talk about doing stuff. He goes out and does it. And I've been very fortunate to go with him on some of these properties, and the things I've seen from the private access he's gotten through hard work and, doing what he says when he says he's going to do it is just incredible. So that's one way to do it around here. Some of these farmers, they could use some help if you got time to spare. That would be one way to get access to a place you couldn't, would be to offer help and do what you're going to say. So
one other thing that I look for at the more northern latitudes. One point I'll make is right now the return migration is a pretty good time to find ducks that you may not have seen in the fall. I see a ton of ducks in like March and April, and that's a good lead to circle back with somebody in those summer months when it can be a nice low pressure time to ask for permission. The other thing I'm looking for, if I don't see ducks, is running, like moving water. If I see moving water across one of these small, 40 to 200 acre properties, I know at a northern climate, if we get a freeze, that's going to have ducks on it. almost without fail, we'll lose some birds, but what we have, we'll concentrate on moving water. And what was a spot that you wouldn't think a duck would land on it is suddenly a really good opportunity that people may be overlooking. So yeah.
And
that's
to
a good
that,
tip.
yeah. I was going to say managing those permissions that you don't use for a year or two, and keeping in contact with those landowners, every year, so that when it does freeze once every 3 years, you can just check in and say, hey, care if we hunt, and you just jump in there, and nobody else has asked in years, if they're new to the game. So
yeah, I think one of the big tips, kind of maybe rephrasing one of the things that we're talking about, is when you want to access private ground, put yourself in the shoes or the life of whoever you're asking permission from. If I'm a farmer and I'm in a combine, or if I'm herding cattle, do I really want somebody stopping me right now? So find that moment where you wouldn't want to be bothered. Find that time, where there isn't pressure. Some of those other things that I'll do, which is, I don't have to work very hard at it because I'm not a fancy dresser, but it's just, if you showed up in this giant fancy truck and you had this, like gaudy equipment, and in other words, you're not very relatable to that individual. So again, think of that individual that you're approaching. Do think about you can only control so much what you're driving, right? But then think about where you drive it, where you park it in their yard, and all the things that you're doing. But I always try to make sure that I'm relatable, and I have to admit it. One of my great tips is to make sure my kids come up to the door with me. I don't think I've ever been turned down with my kids. Do you guys have any experience with Garrett Youth Hunters or Brett with kids in tow?
Well, my little boy actually went with me this fall to check on a permission, and of course, it went very well. But yeah, just starting with that. Yeah, not too much with the kids yet. He's only 4, so just starting that game.
So it's going to get easier for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my some of my first experiences knocking on doors for access was up in Iowa pheasant hunting. As a kid, we'd take a trip up there, and I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And so I would always get drug out of the truck. Garrett, get up there and knock on the door, and then my dad and his buddies would sit in the truck and wait on me to knock on the door and get permission, because they knew as a young man I'd have potentially better opportunity for securing access. It's interesting you mentioned the paying attention to when you reach out to farmers. And I've heard that before. And when they answer the phone with a frustrated "what," that's never a good thing, right? And if it's in the middle of harvest season, you need to be cognizant of that. And maybe it's worth going and knocking on their door, in the early evening before dark, and maybe you talk to their wife, or hey, can I leave my number, or can I call him later? Do you know when he'll get out of the field? And let him get home, settle in, and then reach out to him for that, try to secure that permission. I know one time in Iowa when I was a kid, we were driving around and we saw a farmer struggling to load hogs, and the guy that we were hunting with is like, hey, let's go jump out and help him, and surely he's got some ground around here that he'd let us pheasant hunt. So we jumped out and helped him load these hogs, got covered in mud and fecal matter and everything else that goes along with hog farming. And then my buddy asked him, hey, do you got any ground that we can pheasant hunt? And he goes, nope. Shut the trailer and drove off. So you gotta always temper your expectations and not get your head hung too low when you get the nose. But I thought that was a pretty creative move, and I've tried to do the same thing. You see a farmer pulling through a gate, jump out, shut the gate behind them, and then say, hey, I'm in the area hunting. Do you need, do you have anything on your property that I can access, or do you allow people to hunt your property? And stuff like that is a good way to approach it. But I think you're right. Be cognizant of where they're at in life and what they're doing, and they're out here trying to make a living just like the rest of us. And they understand that we're on vacation basically. So you got to be respectful of their time when you make those points of contact.
Yeah, one friend of mine that I hunt on their cattle ranch, and started out as a of me asking permission to hunt, and then now I trim their horse hooves. I'm their farrier. I help with branding. I help fix fence and all those types of things. But he shared, just through that friendship, he shared with me, I think, what every single farmer or rancher who likes the outdoors is thinking when you come knock on their door. He said, I like to hunt too, And he says, I'm so busy. I have the cattle, I have all the harvest, I have all this kind of stuff. And he goes, every time somebody knocks on my door, he goes, it's a reminder that I don't have time to do that kind of stuff. And so so you really have to make yourself of value to them. That's their business, right? That is their business. That is their income. And you're, like you said, Garrett, you're asking for, just for recreation, tourism, so to speak. But for some, it's a reminder. It's a painful reminder that they don't have the time to do what you're just asking to do on their property, which is a stellar property in many cases. Brett, what are some of your tricks to maintain? I think it's once you find that property and secure access, maintaining it is critical.
Yeah. I think laying out, being very specific on even on the ask, what your expectations are, what you plan to be doing, how many people will be joining you, how many times per year, where should you park, are there any days you shouldn't come. I like to have as many details as possible, so that you're not in question anytime you're pulling in the morning. Should I be here or not? Because I have some places it's like they let you in there a couple times a year. That's all they want bothered. So like we respect it. But it's handy to have them like that's where an early introduction or an off time discussion is better, to give them some time to either get back to you on how they want it handled. But yeah, check-ins as much as you can. Today now having a cell phone number, some of the guys will text, some don't. But yeah, just being very courteous. I always think of like, I don't have enough property, but if I did, to where if some kids were like, hey, can we come play wiffle ball in your backyard? It's like, well, I'm not into wiffle ball, but sure. And it's like, but what are you getting out of that? Like, who's showing up? What actually what are they actually doing? Is how I like to think of it. And it's like, I never want to wear out my welcome on a property is really key. You don't want to be a burden to the landowner, because we've all had the stories of, you lose permission because what somebody else has done, and now we and some of my other friends, we all maintain some permissions that we have exclusive private access, and we haven't asked for it, but the landowners, they enjoy having people there doing the activity that they allow them to do, and they do it right. Leave the property better than you find it, close all the gates that you opened, and if you see something, mention it to the farmer, say, this looked out of place, is it okay? Things like that. It's the basics of, I think, being decent in the outdoors to, other hunters, to the landowner, especially, because without them, especially around here, I would have very little, the public river, sure, I could hunt there, but a lot of the access, the landowners own to the high water mark. So you're trespassing to cross to get to the river unless you're using a public access. So yeah, it's really critical to maintain that. And I, like, as somebody who shares properties, I wish everybody would take as much care. The other thing is driving on fields. Everybody, it's a different thing, but here in Pennsylvania, especially a lot of Amish farmers, like you never drive on any fields. You walk it in every time. So yeah, things like that, the basics. But
yeah, there's a long list that we could. Man, I think we're on the edge of making this conversation too long for the listener, but I think we could develop a long list of etiquette. Here's what I drive. Here's my truck.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I go more than once? Can I take other people with me? That's one that I've heard a lot of people lose permission. They're not open about how many people that they plan on taking with them, and one, a party of one or two in their mind turns into 10 people, and they said, yeah, that's more than I thought, and you lose that permission. So over communicate, be considerate, explore your social circle for opportunities to hunt, use some of those online resources, look for odd areas, do some scouting. I love yours, Kyle. That's a great one. The day after duck season closes, that's the only thing different, is that people can't hunt them anymore. So that is a great time to be looking at, at bird behavior and say, wow, yeah, nobody's out here hunting. I can't hunt it right now, but you get a sense of maybe some of the areas that you could focus in on, and give it a pause for a couple, 3 months and start talking to those people. So
Yeah, it makes me it makes me feel like you're duck hunting kind of all summer long then. The only thing to me that's better than mallards backpedaling in the decoys is getting that getting a yes. That one time out of 15, 20. It's very exciting to get.
yeah, well, perfect. Well, hey, all three of you guys, thank you so much for your time. I should throw out one disclaimer. Because we're focusing in on private land, doesn't mean that public land sucks. I do hunt. More than half of my hunts are on public land, right? And I'm so grateful for the public land access that we all have. I think in the United States and Canada, to have that, United States in particular, to have that public resource, for anybody to go hunting. But yeah, it is nice to have as many opportunities as you can, and I think in some situations, Brett, yeah, you end up with sole access of a property, accidental, intentional, maybe, but it is nice to be able to wake up and get there 5 minutes before shooting time and be able to hunt. And in a public situation, you might not have that freedom of comfort to just show up. It's just a little different dynamic. So yeah, I'd encourage everybody to go out there and be a good ambassador, for hunting. When you're out there talking to landowners, be courteous, be respectful. And frankly, if you handle yourself well, you can get told a no and still be a good ambassador, for hunting. And maybe a couple of years down the road, they'll remember you were the nice person, and maybe they'll give you permission. Because I think a lot about life is timing, right? You might have caught that landowner, in a bad day, something in their personal life and their, in their personal business, or maybe they had negative experiences with hunters. And so if you treated yourself, if you handled yourself treated them with respect, maybe a year later, maybe months later, try again. Give it a little bit of time. Just saying, hey, I know you told me no, just wanted to double check. And I've seen some of those situations where mostly it's because I just kind of hung around a little bit and I showed some interest in their life, where they gave me a no, but by the time I left, they go, you know what, you're a nice guy, go ahead and go for it. So don't give up, and always lead with respect. Well, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Garrett, people can find you on our website. Same thing with you,
Yes,
Kyle.
sir.
Yep. And Brett, we are going to give you because you support, well, just because you're a cool guy, but, it also helps that you're,
Yes, sir.
that you like Delta and you're good to Delta. Are you going to be at the expo again this year?
Yep, we'll be there.
Grumpy
Yeah,
Duck.
that's gonna. Yep, grumpyduckco.com. That'll be it.
Awesome. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you all again soon.